Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are pulling back the curtain on 5 stories that the mainstream press is either burying or barely skimming. These are stories about the architecture of power, how sacred sites get erased, how legal systems get weaponized, how arms deals get dressed up as diplomacy, how resistance figures get turned into caricatures, and how an entire city survives under bombardment while the world moves on. My partner Maya Clarity is here, and we are not going to be polite about any of it.
That's right, Alex. Let's start in Hebron, because what's happening at the Ibrahimi Mosque is one of the most brazen acts of cultural erasure happening in real time, and it is barely making headlines in Western media. Middle East Eye's Lubna Masarwa has documented what she calls the Israeli unmaking of the Ibrahimi Mosque, one of the oldest and most sacred Islamic sites in Palestine, built over the Cave of the Patriarchs. We're talking about a site that has been a mosque for over 700 years, and Israel is systematically transforming it, physically and legally, into something unrecognizable.
Let's put this in historical context, because history is exactly what's being rewritten here. The Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron's Old City has been under a divided arrangement since the 1994 massacre, when Baruch Goldstein, an Israeli settler, walked in during Ramadan prayers and murdered 29 Palestinian worshippers. The response from Israel was not to remove the settlers. It was to divide the mosque, giving settlers control over a significant portion of it. That was the beginning. What's happening now, according to Middle East Eye's reporting, is the acceleration of a long-term project to fully de-Islamicize this site.
And that's the pattern people need to understand. After a massacre of Palestinians, the punishment fell on Palestinians. Restrictions on Palestinian movement in Hebron intensified. Checkpoints multiplied. The mosque was partitioned. And now, decades later, we're seeing what that partition was always designed to become: a full takeover. Reports indicate Israeli authorities have been installing infrastructure changes, altering access points, and expanding the settler-controlled sections. This isn't renovation. This is colonization of a house of worship, carried out incrementally so the world doesn't notice on any single day.
And who benefits? The settler movement in Hebron, which is among the most extreme in the entire West Bank. We're talking about roughly 800 settlers who live in the heart of a Palestinian city of over 200,000 people, protected by thousands of Israeli soldiers. The Ibrahimi Mosque is their ideological prize. Every square meter they take from that mosque is a victory for the religious nationalist project that views all of historic Palestine as divinely promised Jewish land. The Israeli government, now dominated by figures like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, is the political engine making this possible.
What mainstream media is not telling you is that this fits a documented pattern of cultural destruction that, under international law, constitutes a war crime. The 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property explicitly prohibits the destruction or appropriation of cultural heritage during occupation. UNESCO has repeatedly recognized the Ibrahimi Mosque as a Palestinian heritage site. But recognition without enforcement is just a press release. And that's all it's been: press releases while the bulldozers and the bureaucrats do their work.
The erasure of the Ibrahimi Mosque is not an isolated incident. It's part of the same logic that demolished entire neighborhoods in Gaza, that restricts Muslim access to Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, that renamed Palestinian villages with Hebrew names. It is a systematic campaign to erase Palestinian presence from the land: physical presence, cultural presence, spiritual presence. And the Western press treats each incident as a discrete event rather than connecting them as chapters in the same project. That's not journalism. That's stenography.
Now let's cross over to the United Kingdom, because the infrastructure of repression doesn't just operate in Palestine. It operates in London, in courtrooms and boardrooms. A new report has identified UK Lawyers for Israel, known as UKLFI, as a, quote, major actor in the repression of Palestine solidarity in Britain. Middle East Eye is reporting on this, and it exposes how a legal organization has been systematically weaponizing the law to silence critics of Israel across British institutions, universities, local councils, cultural organizations, and media outlets.
This is critical, Maya, because when people think about suppression of Palestine solidarity, they think about protest crackdowns or social media censorship. What UKLFI represents is something far more sophisticated: the use of legal threats, formal complaints, and regulatory pressure to create a chilling effect. They don't need to win every case. They just need to make the cost of speaking out high enough that institutions self-censor. A university thinks twice before hosting a Palestinian speaker. A council reverses a BDS resolution. A cultural venue cancels an event. That's the machinery at work.
The report details how UKLFI has filed complaints with regulatory bodies, threatened legal action against organizations that pass boycott motions, and pressured institutions into adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of antisemitism, a definition whose examples conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Jewish hatred. This is a deliberate strategy. By embedding that conflation into institutional policy, you create a framework where any substantive criticism of Israeli policy can be characterized as a hate crime. It's a legal straitjacket on free expression, and it's been astonishingly effective.
Let's name what this is: it's lawfare. The weaponization of legal systems not to pursue justice but to suppress political speech. And it's not unique to the UK. We see parallel operations across the Western world, in the United States with groups like the Lawfare Project, in France, in Germany. There's a coordinated transnational infrastructure designed to ensure that the one country in the world you cannot criticize in polite society is the one currently facing a genocide case at the International Court of Justice. The irony would be funny if the consequences weren't so devastating for the people being silenced and the people being killed.
And who loses here? First, obviously, Palestinians and their advocates, who face professional consequences, legal threats, and reputational damage for speaking about documented human rights abuses. But also British democracy itself. When a legal organization can effectively veto public discourse on foreign policy through threats and complaints, that's not the rule of law. That's the rule of intimidation dressed in legal language. The report's findings should be front-page news, and the fact that it's relegated to specialized outlets like Middle East Eye tells you everything about the media ecosystem these groups have helped construct.
Now, let's shift to a story that reveals how the Israel-Palestine conflict radiates outward and reshapes global alliances. Al Jazeera is reporting on Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Israel and why it matters for Pakistan's security. This is a story that most Western outlets will cover as a simple diplomatic visit, two leaders shaking hands, maybe a defense deal. But the strategic implications run much deeper, and they threaten to destabilize an already volatile region in South Asia.
The Modi-Netanyahu relationship has been one of the most consequential and underreported geopolitical developments of the past decade. India has become one of Israel's largest arms customers, purchasing billions of dollars in military hardware, drones, missiles, surveillance systems, radar technology. But this isn't just a buyer-seller relationship anymore. Analysts quoted by Al Jazeera are warning that the tightening strategic embrace between New Delhi and Tel Aviv is creating new security calculations for Pakistan, which sees itself increasingly encircled by hostile or aligned powers.
Think about what this means on the ground. Israel's battle-tested surveillance technology, its drone warfare capabilities, its cyber intelligence systems, these are being integrated into India's military apparatus. And India's primary adversary is Pakistan. So when Modi visits Israel and signs new defense cooperation agreements, Pakistan's military planners aren't just watching a photo op. They're watching a potential shift in the balance of power along one of the most militarized borders on Earth, the line of control in Kashmir. This is arms proliferation with a geopolitical multiplier effect.
What the mainstream media won't tell you is how this triangulation connects back to the broader story. Israel isn't just selling weapons to India out of commercial interest, though the profits are enormous. It's building a network of allied states that depend on Israeli military technology and therefore have a strategic incentive to support, or at least not oppose, Israeli policy. India's votes at the United Nations, its silence on Gaza, its muted response to the ICJ proceedings, these aren't coincidences. They're the diplomatic dividends of arms deals. You buy the weapons, you buy the silence.
And Pakistan is caught in a vice. Its traditional diplomatic ally, Saudi Arabia, has been normalizing relations with Israel. Its neighbor India is deepening military cooperation with Tel Aviv. Its other neighbor Iran is under bombardment. Pakistan's diplomatic space is shrinking, and that creates exactly the kind of desperation that leads to miscalculation. Analysts are warning that this could accelerate Pakistan's own military modernization, potentially including its nuclear posture. We are watching an arms race being fueled by Israeli defense exports, and no one in Western media is connecting these dots.
Which brings us to Iran, and a remarkable profile from the South China Morning Post about Ali Shamkhani, a man who has become the face of Iran's wartime resistance. Shamkhani is 70 years old, a former Revolutionary Guard commander, a former secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, and a trusted advisor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He was pulled alive from the rubble of his own home in Tehran after an Israeli strike in June 2025. And his response was not to flee or hide. He taunted Israel publicly.
Let's sit with that image for a moment, because it tells you something Western media refuses to acknowledge: the strikes on Iran have not broken Iranian resolve. They've hardened it. Shamkhani represents the old guard of the Islamic Republic, a man who has survived the Iran-Iraq War, decades of sanctions, assassination campaigns against his colleagues, and now direct bombardment of his capital city. The South China Morning Post describes him as central to Iranian policymaking during what it calls the country's most testing military confrontations and diplomatic endeavors. This is a man who has been at the nexus of every critical Iranian security decision.
What's crucial here is the context the article provides about the stakes. Shamkhani is advising Khamenei in a high-stakes standoff with the United States that, as the article puts it, could determine whether the Islamic Republic, born from revolution in 1979, survives. That's not hyperbole. Iran is facing simultaneous military pressure from Israel, maximum economic pressure from U.S. sanctions, and internal political tensions. The question of whether Iran pursues a nuclear deterrent, negotiates under pressure, or fights a prolonged asymmetric conflict, Shamkhani is reportedly at the center of all three calculations.
And here's what mainstream coverage misses entirely. When Western outlets cover Iran, it's almost exclusively through the lens of threat: Iran as villain, Iran as proliferator, Iran as sponsor of terrorism. What's absent is any analysis of cause and effect. Iran's defensive posture exists in response to very real threats. Its top general Qasem Soleimani was assassinated by the U.S. in 2020, its nuclear scientists have been systematically killed, its territory has been struck by Israel. Ali Shamkhani being pulled from rubble is not a storyline about Iranian aggression. It's a storyline about a country under siege that refuses to capitulate.
The bigger question, and this is one that Western media actively avoids, is what happens if Iran's leadership concludes that diplomacy has failed. Shamkhani himself has been involved in back-channel negotiations. He reportedly met with Saudi officials to restore diplomatic relations in 2023 in a deal brokered by China. He represents the faction that has tried engagement alongside deterrence. But if figures like Shamkhani, the negotiators, the strategists, are being targeted in their own homes, what message does that send to Tehran about the viability of the diplomatic path? You're not just bombing a building. You're bombing the possibility of a negotiated outcome.
And that calculation connects directly to our last story tonight: Kyiv. Der Spiegel has published a powerful portrait of the Ukrainian capital after 4 years of war, headlined "The Courage of Kyiv." The article describes a city where attacks come at night but daily life continues when the sun rises. After 4 years of Russian bombardment, Kyiv remains defiant. And the question Der Spiegel poses is essential: where does that strength come from?
It's an important question, and it deserves an honest answer, one that includes both admiration for civilian resilience and a hard look at the forces that have prolonged this conflict. The people of Kyiv are not abstractions. They are parents sending children to school past missile craters, workers commuting through air raid sirens, business owners rebuilding storefronts that get destroyed again. Their courage is real and undeniable. But courage alone doesn't explain 4 years of war. Policy decisions do. And many of those decisions were made far from Kyiv.
Let's be direct. The war in Ukraine has lasted 4 years because powerful interests benefit from its continuation. The US and European defense industries have seen record profits. NATO has been revitalized and expanded after decades of questioning its relevance. The energy map of Europe has been completely redrawn, with American LNG replacing Russian pipeline gas. None of this means the Ukrainian people asked for this war or deserve it. But it means that the voices calling for continued fighting until total victory are not always motivated by concern for Ukrainian lives. Some of them are motivated by strategic advantage and profit margins.
Der Spiegel describes the daily rhythm of survival, the nighttime attacks, the morning resilience. But what the article likely underexplores, as most Western coverage does, is the staggering human cost. Hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. Millions of Ukrainians displaced. An entire generation of young men killed or wounded. Cities across eastern and southern Ukraine reduced to rubble. Kyiv's courage is real, but it exists alongside a catastrophe that diplomatic intervention could have mitigated, and that several proposed ceasefire frameworks have been rejected not just by Moscow but by actors who claim to be Ukraine's allies.
And here's the connection that ties tonight's stories together: Maya. In every single case, Hebron, London, New Delhi, Tehran, Kyiv, we see the same fundamental dynamic. Power operates through destruction while wrapping itself in the language of security, legality, alliance, and resilience. The Ibrahimi Mosque is being dismantled in the name of Israeli security. Palestinian solidarity is being crushed in the name of legal order. Arms deals are being sealed in the name of strategic partnership. Iran is being bombed in the name of non-proliferation. And Ukraine's war continues in the name of freedom. The language changes. The mechanism is the same, the powerful act, the vulnerable suffer, and the media narrates it as inevitable.
That's exactly right. And this is why we do this show. Because the connections matter. The Israeli defense technology tested on Palestinians in Hebron gets sold to India for use along the Pakistani border. The legal frameworks used by UKLFI to silence Palestine solidarity in Britain are modeled on strategies developed in the United States and exported globally. The same Western governments that arm Israel and India preach international law when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. The inconsistency is not a bug. It is the system. Rules for some. Impunity for others. And a media infrastructure designed to make you think these are separate stories when they are, in fact, one story.
One story about who gets to use violence and call it self-defense. One story about who gets to occupy land and call it a security measure. One story about who gets to sell weapons and call it an alliance. One story about who gets to destroy a mosque, silence a protester, arm a government, bomb a capital, or prolong a war, and face no consequences. That is the world we are living in, and these 5 stories, when you connect them, form a map of how that world operates. The Ibrahimi Mosque, UK courtrooms, the India-Israel axis, Shamkhani's bombed home, Kyiv's air raid shelters, they are all coordinates on the same map.
And the people who draw that map do not want you to see it whole. They want you to see fragments. They want you to see a Middle East story and an Asia story and a Europe story. They want you to see complexity so overwhelming that you throw up your hands and change the channel. But the pattern is simple: military power, economic leverage, legal manipulation, and media complicity work together to maintain a global order that benefits a small number of states and corporations at the expense of everyone else. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is an observable, documented, sourceable pattern. And tonight's sources, Middle East Eye, Al Jazeera, the South China Morning Post, Der Spiegel, are doing the work that much of the Anglophone press refuses to do.
So here's our call to action, and we mean this. First, read the sources. Go to Middle East Eye and read Lubna Masarwa's investigation on the Ibrahimi Mosque. Read the full report on UKLFI's operations. Read Al Jazeera's analysis of the Modi-Israel-Pakistan triangle. Read the South China Morning Post profile of Shamkhani. Read Der Spiegel's Kyiv portrait. Do not rely on headlines. Do not rely on algorithms. Go to the source material and make up your own mind.
Second, follow the money. Every story we covered tonight has a financial through line. Israeli defense exports, British legal industry billing hours, Indian weapons procurement budgets, Iranian sanctions evasion economies, Western arms shipments to Ukraine. Money is the blood in the veins of every one of these conflicts. When you understand who profits, you understand who has an incentive to perpetuate the status quo. Track the contracts. Read the financial disclosures. The truth is almost always in the budget lines.
Third, support independent journalism. The stories we covered tonight came from Middle East Eye, Al Jazeera, the South China Morning Post, and Der Spiegel, outlets that operate outside the narrow consensus of American and British mainstream media. These organizations face funding pressures, legal threats, and in some cases physical danger to their reporters. If you value knowing what's actually happening in the world, put your money where your values are. Subscribe, donate, share their work.
And finally, reject the fragmentation. When someone tells you these are separate issues, that Palestine has nothing to do with Pakistan, that Iran has nothing to do with Ukraine, that British courtrooms have nothing to do with Hebron checkpoints, they are either uninformed or they are protecting the system that connects them. Your job as a citizen, as a human being, is to see the whole picture. Connect the dots. Challenge the narratives. Ask who benefits and who bleeds. That is what Truth Report is here to do, every single night.
I'm Alex Truth.
I'm Maya Clarity.
And you've been watching Truth Report. The truth doesn't need your belief. It needs your attention. We'll see you next time.